Thomas Burke had not felt his heart beat with purpose in 10 years. But when the dying alien woman whispered, "My children are on the ship," something inside him that had been dormant since his own children's funeral roared back to life. The scratching at Thomas' front door started just before 3 a.m. His eyes snapped open from a deep sleep induced by decades of war and loss. Reflexes honed by years in special forces kicked into gear faster than thought. He reached for the pistol under his pillow, fingers curling around cold metal with practiced ease. The shotgun leaned against the wall beside him. He grabbed it instead. Cradling the gun like an old friend, Thomas rose from bed and padded to the door on bare feet, careful not to make a sound. Scratching came again, a persistent scraping that made his stomach twist into knots of dread. He hadn't felt anything in 10 years, no fear or anger or purpose. But now his blood ran cold as he stared at the thick oak planks of his front door. He turned the lock with deliberate slowness, sliding a bolt into place before pulling it open. Cold air rushed past him, and an unexpected figure crumpled to the ground in a spray of crumb. A pale blue woman whose skin had been torn by multiple gunshot wounds. Her silver hair was matted against her face where blood had dried. Violet eyes looked up at him with impossible determination. "Please," she whispered, voice barely above a breath but unmistakably pleading and terrified. Thomas stepped back as if struck by lightning, one hand still gripping the shotgun while his brain raced to process what he saw. This wasn't humanity, was something else entirely. He had faced horrors in war that humanity could hardly imagine, but nothing like this alien woman at his feet. Her fingers clutched his ankle with a grip so tight it would have crushed any bones left in her hand if she were still capable of such strength. Blood welled around them where they dug into him through the thin fabric of his pajama pants. He felt every tremor that raced up her arm and knew there was little time. "Please," she said again, voice cracking as it rose to a desperate cry. "My children, they are still on the ship." Thomas' grip tightened around the shotgun barrel, angling downward in preparation for whatever might come next. He had never let his guard down since he moved Harrowing years ago, when he buried what was left of his family after that last mission gone wrong. His cabin was surrounded by thick forest. It should have been safe, but safety didn't matter now. Something inside him woke up with a ferocity he hadn't felt in far too long, a primal instinct to protect and fight, to save lives where death had claimed so many before. "Where is this ship?" Thomas demanded softly but firmly, voice rough from disuse yet still commanding. The alien's eyes closed briefly, her grip weakening on his ankle as if she were using the last of what strength remained just to stay conscious. She opened them again with an intensity that pierced him deep down into places he hadn't realized had lain dormant since before losing everything in that car crash a decade ago. "The slaver ship," she whispered back through ragged breaths, her voice fading but somehow holding on to one final plea. "They will kill them if I don't get help." Thomas' heart skipped and then started pounding wildly as the reality of the situation hit him hard. This woman was fighting for something beyond just herself. She wanted to save lives, even as hers slipped away. "Tell me where it is," he growled, voice low but urgent now. "I'll find them." Her eyes flared with a mixture of hope and pain so intense that Thomas couldn't help but feel an immediate connection, a shared grief over lost children, something neither of them had truly recovered from since the day their lives changed forever. She tried to lift her head higher off the cold wood floor, wincing as muscles tensed in places where bones should have been already shattered or broken. From around her neck she pulled out a small data chip that glimmered with an almost eerie light despite its small size, and pressed it into Thomas' palm before letting go of his ankle completely. "It is this," the woman rasped, then fell silent again, as though too exhausted even to breathe properly any longer. "Please, I beg y'all save them." Thomas stared down at the data chip in his hand, fingers clutching tightly around its edges like it could save her if only he clung harder enough. But she was right, had to act fast. "All right," Thomas finally answered through clenched teeth, voice firm once more though filled with a storm of conflicting emotions and adrenaline. "It'll get them out." The alien's eyes squeezed shut again, as if in relief. A small gasp escaped her lips before silence fell between them, heavy yet somehow hopeful too. The only sounds were the distant whispering wind through the trees beyond his cabin walls, and the faint sound of blood dripping onto the wooden planks from her body. Thomas stepped back into his hoe, used quickly but carefully, not wanting to jar her any more than necessary with movement so close by now that she was lying at his feet in a rapidly spreading puddle. He closed the door behind him gently, this time more out of habit than anything else, since he had never been one for superstitions. Turning around fully inside his home, Thomas looked down again once more to where the woman remained sprawled on the floor. Her skin was turning gray now from the blood loss. Her breath came in shallow gasps, mixed with occasional dry coughing fits that made him cringe involuntarily despite himself. But there was still something indefatigable about her, something pushing through every moment of pain and exhaustion to cling on to life just a little bit longer. "Stay strong," Thomas said aloud now, though more for his own sake than hers. He didn't know how many more times he would be able to face this kind of thing before the darkness inside him claimed back all that was still left. She opened her eyes again briefly and managed one final nod before closing them once more. This time, perhaps not just in rest, but also surrendering some small part of herself to whatever fate had chosen for her. There were others depending on her strength, now children, who needed their mother's fight no matter how little she could give anymore. Thomas turned away from the door and moved toward his desk, pulling out a map he kept handy of nearby shipping lanes and cargo routes. The data chip would lead him to where exactly this slaver ship was located, but only after they figured out which one it might actually be amongst all the others that came through these waters on any given day. His fingers traced over familiar coordinates, as if calling them back from memory, places he used to know intimately, every corner and shadow remembered in detail. He inserted the data chip into his computer and waited for its information to load onto the screen before him. Images flickered rapidly across it, showing a detailed view of what looked like cargo holds, navigation logs, and an array of unfamiliar systems that clearly marked this as some kind of alien technology. But amidst all those complex diagrams and maps was also another image flashing briefly, a small container labeled Cargo Hold 9. Cargo Hold 9, Thomas repeated aloud to himself firmly. He glanced back at the woman on his floor one last time before turning away, fully knowing what he had to do next. His mind raced ahead, already planning how best to get there without alerting anyone aboard ship until it was too late for them to stop him, how to bypass security systems and sneak past guards where exactly this cargo container might be located. And in that moment, as he started plotting his course again toward danger and conflict after years of avoiding both at all costs, Thomas Burke felt alive once more, not just because there were lives depending on what he could still do, but also because finally something was worth fighting for beyond himself alone anymore. He would save those children, if it killed him trying. Their mother's sacrifice wasn't in vain tonight, no matter how little time remained between them and darkness closing around her like a cold, unfeeling shroud. Thomas Burke watched as Kira Velshon's body shuddered once more, her breathing growing shallower by the second. He approached her cautiously, kneeling down beside her and gently cradling her head in his hands. Her eyes fluttered open again, meeting Thomas's with a fierce determination that belied her current state. "Please," she whispered through chapped lips, her voice barely audible above her ragged breathing. "Find them. They are my children." Thomas' heart clenched as he took stock of the extent of her injuries once more. Multiple gunshot wounds marred her pale blue skin, blood drying and crusted around each entry point. His medical training kicked in automatically despite his reluctance to see this new chapter unfolding before him. "All right," Thomas said quietly but firmly. "I'll stabilize you first." He moved quickly yet carefully, rummaging through a supply cabinet he had kept fully stocked just for such eventualities, an old habit from when he was still on active duty. His hands were steady as they cleaned and bandaged her wounds with sterile gauze, applying pressure where necessary to staunch the flow of blood. "Don't you worry," Thomas said, his voice low but reassuring. "I've got this." Kyra nodded weakly in response, though a look of pain crossed over her face as he worked on one particularly severe wound near her shoulder blade. He could see sweat beading along her forehead and the sheer willpower it took for her to remain still. "Here," Thomas said once she was stabilized enough that any further movement wouldn't worsen her condition. "Drink this." He handed her a small bottle of water, which she accepted with gratitude, even though drinking seemed an effort in itself at the moment. She sipped slowly until he took it away from her, knowing better than to push too hard. "Now," Thomas said after setting the empty container aside on his desk, turning back towards Kyra, who was now watching him intently through weary eyes. "Tell me about your children." Kyra reached into a small pouch at her side and pulled out an unassuming data chip with intricate alien markings etched onto its surface. She held it up in front of Thomas for him to see. "Inside is the layout of my ship," she said hoarsely, coughing slightly, as if each word hurt, but still pressing on determinedly nonetheless. "It also has information about where exactly the cargo container holding them can be found." Thomas took the chip and studied it closely before slotting it into his computer. The screen lit up almost instantly with a myriad of alien symbols scrolling rapidly across its surface, too complex for him to decipher immediately without some form of translation software. "Give me a minute," Thomas said as he began running diagnostics on the foreign technology. "I need to see if I can break down this encryption." Kyra watched silently from where she lay, her violet eyes following his every move with an intensity that spoke volumes about how much was riding on what he could do next. Thomas's fingers flew over familiar keyboard shortcuts as his mind raced through different possibilities for decoding alien tech. He had been in enough tight spots during military operations to know there were ways around almost any barrier if one knew where and how to look. The program hummed with activity before finally settling into a coherent display of information about the ship's layout, cargo hold numbers, and guard placements. "All right," Thomas said once he was satisfied that everything had been loaded properly onto his screen. He turned back towards Kyra, who now appeared slightly more hopeful, though still gravely wounded. "Now tell me where exactly your children are." Kyra pointed at a section labeled Cargo Hold 9 on the detailed layout of the ship displayed before them. "Cargo Hold 9, Thomas repeated, nodding once in affirmation as he committed the details to memory for what was undoubtedly going to be an incredibly risky mission. He knew full well that any attempt to rescue these children would likely result in his own death. Even if there were a chance of success, it wasn't one he could guarantee. But something within him stirred, an old flame reignited by the maternal desperation burning brightly within Kyra's eyes despite her dire condition. A reminder perhaps of why he had once fought with everything he had and still felt compelled to do so again now that there was someone else counting on his actions beyond just himself. "All right," Thomas said finally, rising from where he knelt beside Kyra as she watched him warily but without a hint of complaint or fear. "I'm going." Kyra's expression shifted ever so slightly towards something akin to surprise mixed with hope, though her voice remained quiet and almost reverent when she spoke next. "But why?" she asked, reaching out tentatively to grasp Thomas's hand, as if ensuring that what he was saying wasn't a fleeting moment of sympathy or misguided bravery. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" Thomas did not look at Kyra in response, choosing instead to stare straight ahead towards the wall where his weapons were kept displayed neatly against it like old friends waiting patiently for use after years apart. "Because I couldn't save my own," he said simply, but with a weight that left no room for argument or misunderstanding about what drove him now beyond simple heroism. Thomas Burke moved like a specter through the dense forest, his boots barely making a sound against the leaf-covered ground. His senses were heightened and focused, every nerve alert for any sign of movement or disturbance that might give away his position. The air was cold, but it did little to distract him from the task at hand. 20 years of special forces training never left him, even in retirement. Those skills had remained as sharp as ever. The slavers were expecting resistance from authorities organized, cautious, by the book soldiers or police who would be slow and methodical in their approach. They did not expect one man with nothing to lose moving through their perimeter like death itself. Thomas' mission was clear: reach the ship, where Kyra's children were being held against all odds. The first 5 guards died before anyone even realized he had breached their defenses. He moved silently, his hands steady and precise as they dispatched each guard in rapid succession. There was no time for hesitation or mercy. Every second counted if there was any hope of rescuing the Vulshar children alive from this nightmare scenario. Thomas's eyes scanned the perimeter with a practiced eye for weaknesses and potential threats. He had to act fast. Every minute that passed increased the danger exponentially, not just for him, but more importantly, for Kyra's 3 young children who were still hidden somewhere within cargo hold 9 of the slaver's ship. Their fate was intrinsically tied up in what Thomas could do next. He approached a small cluster of guards gathered around a fire pit to warm themselves before their shifts began. They chattered loudly among each other, their laughter and idle conversation masking any awareness that an enemy might be closing in from all sides. This would have been impossible for regular forces tasked with securing the perimeter. They wouldn't dare risk crossing such open ground when there was so much uncertainty about what lay beyond. But Thomas wasn't a soldier anymore, was something far more dangerous, a man driven by desperation and rage over his own failures. He moved swiftly, blending into shadows where others would see only darkness, using every scrap of training ingrained in muscle memory to slip through the lines unobserved until he reached them undetected. With silent precision unmatched by years of combat experience, Thomas struck decisively, taking out the guards with brutal efficiency before they had even noticed his presence. Blood sprayed as knuckles met skulls, and bodies fell like stones into the cold night air around him, without a single cry for help or alarm raised to warn those nearby. But then one man did scream, his lungs filled with fear as he realized too late that death was here in the form of a lone predator moving through their midst like smoke on the wind. impossible yet undeniably real. By now other guards had heard and responded accordingly. Shouts echoed across distances where Thomas could see them converging from different directions. The slavers were beginning to figure out what he was doing, closing off possible escape routes, reinforcing positions at key points around their perimeter while increasing patrols along suspected entryways. They would soon be ready for him with weapons drawn and orders given. He knew this moment wouldn't last forever. The slaver ship wasn't far now. Every second mattered, but so did every move. He couldn't afford to waste time or make mistakes that might cost lives of innocents aboard or his own in vain pursuit of an impossible goal. Yet despite the tightening noose around him, Thomas' resolve only hardened further with each passing moment. He had nothing left worth losing except maybe this chance at redemption for all those he couldn't save back when he wore a uniform and carried orders instead of making decisions based purely on instinct driven by survival and protection. And so it was that within minutes after beginning his assault, Thomas found himself sprinting across open terrain under cover of darkness towards what lay ahead, not just the slaver ship, but also perhaps answers about why Kyra's plea had struck such a deep chord inside him now more than ever before since losing everything he held dear 10 long years ago. Thomas reached for his weapon holster strapped tightly at his side as he prepared to breach cargo hold 9. His hands were calloused, knuckles white with tension, but steady nevertheless. He paused briefly, taking stock of the situation one last time before plunging forward into combat once again, without hesitation or fear showing on those intense blue eyes. "Let's end this," Thomas whispered fiercely under his breath as he sprinted through thick brush towards the slaver ship, where danger awaited him now in its most deadly form. He needed to be swift, decisive, and ruthless. Every guard that stood between him and cargo hold 9 was a potential obstacle or casualty needing elimination on sight. He knew full well what lay ahead, impossible odds stacked against every objective he set out with earlier when Kyra first appeared at his door asking for help. But Thomas also understood deep down within himself why this mission mattered more than any other ever had before. It wasn't just about saving aliens anymore, but redeeming a piece of lost humanity buried under layers of grief and regret over failures long since past. And so it was that with nothing left to lose, Master Sergeant Thomas Burke stepped out from shadows into the harsh light awaiting him aboard ship where children's lives hung precariously on knife-edge balance between life giving hope or deathly despair. His mission had begun in earnest, no turning back, until either victory or defeat became final truth at an game conclusion here shortly. Thomas moved through the darkness with a deadly grace, his movements fluid and precise as he slipped past guard posts one by one. The slavers were not prepared for someone who would breach their defenses without warning or delay. They had no time to call out alarms before Thomas' knife silenced each sentry in turn. His heart pounded hard against ribs, but it was a rhythm born of adrenaline rather than fear. The old soldier within him had awoken fully now, ready and willing once again to face whatever lay ahead. The ship loomed large on the horizon, its dark hull gleaming faintly under starlight as Thomas approached steadily through fields of snow-kissed earth. He halted briefly near an outcrop, where he could observe sentry patterns for a moment before launching himself forward in full sprint towards main entrance gates, which glinted ominously against approaching darkness. As guards began to notice his presence, alarms blaring, weapons drawn from various corners, did not falter even once, but rather pushed harder still into fray of battle unfolding ahead. This was where he belonged now, in midst of conflict, fighting fiercely for survival and justice alike, whenever and however necessary to achieve victory over oppressive forces arrayed against him. Thomas ducked under barbed wire fencing marking outer perimeter, his feet kicking dirt up behind him as speed increased exponentially with each passing moment closer toward heart of slaver operation. He reached main entrance gate within seconds of first sighting it from afar, pressing body flat against ground once more, where he could study guards watching entry points closely while maintaining distance themselves out of range for quick attack without proper preparation. This was the toughest part, gate itself guarded by two burly men clad in heavy armor and armed with rifles trained outward toward forest cover. Thomas' heart thudded wildly within chest, but hands moved deftly nonetheless as he reached into pocket where hidden blade waited concealed beneath fabric of jacket sleeve. He sprang up suddenly like coiled spring, unleashed forward against both guards at once before they could react properly, knives flashing silver through gloom surrounding them left and right. One man fell instantly, with knife buried deep within neck, leaving gurgling gasp barely audible above cacophony of shouts rising from nearby barracks where additional soldiers prepared to engage hostile intruder. Other guard tried desperately pulling trigger, only for Thomas' boot to meet jaw, sending him sprawling backwards, unconscious, onto snow-covered ground beside comrade already down. With that done, Master Sergeant slipped through main entrance behind now vacated bodies before they could fully regroup and mount coordinated assault against single attacker moving silently but surely deeper into heart of enemy territory. Thomas continued his silent advance towards cargo hold 9, bypassing additional checkpoints with skill honed over decades in field operations. Each encounter was brief, yet brute, knives flashing deadly quick amidst darkness, where night vision goggles provided little protection against agile form darting nimbly between shadows until next target emerged into line of sight. As he approached designated area on map given earlier by Kyra, Thomas slowed his pace cautiously, entering cargo hold section through side entrance left partially unguarded, due likely assumption that any threats would come from front gates rather than less obvious approaches like this one. Inside, air reeked heavily of chemicals and grease. Fluorescent lighting hummed overhead, casting sickly glow over rows upon rows stacked crates lining both sides of corridor stretching endlessly towards distant end where cargo hold 9 was located according to schematic provided by alien woman. Thomas moved with calculated speed, no every step careful yet determined as he made his way through maze like confines toward final destination. His senses were heightened, alert for any sign of guards or traps along the way, but also acutely aware that time was running out. Children must be saved before their captors could turn against them violently in frustration over broken plans. Reaching cargo hold 9 finally, after navigating labyrinthine pathways within ship's belly, Thomas paused momentarily at entrance to take stock situation one last time. He had come too far now to stop short of achieving goal set forth earlier that night. It was all or nothing from here onward as he pushed open heavy door leading inside container where Kyra's children waited for rescue. Thomas stepped into cargo hold 9, eyes scanning rapidly across dimly lit space, searching for signs of life among piles, crates, and machinery. It wasn't long before his keen gaze spotted movement near rear corner, an indistinct form huddled together under blanket, presumably belonging to those being held captive here against will. He moved quickly but quietly towards them, every muscle coiled tightly, ready to spring into action if necessary to protect these vulnerable innocents from harm should slavers attempt sudden attack. Reaching children finally, after brief sprint through narrow passageways leading inward. Further still, Thomas knelt beside huddled forms, offering reassuring presence, alongside calm voice speaking softly, encouraging words meant specifically for them alone amidst chaos surrounding situation outside. "We're here now," he whispered gently, as hands reached out tenderly to grasp small shoulders and pull frightened youngsters close into protective embrace against chest where warmth radiated outward, providing comfort sorely needed during times such as these. "I promise you will be safe." With children secured closely alongside him, Thomas began retracing steps back towards main entrance area of ship, with utmost care given potential ambushes still possible along path already traveled by lone intruder intent on completing mission regardless personal cost involved. However, fate had other plans for former soldier as he neared cargo hold exit. Sudden burst noise interrupted otherwise silent trek. Slavery reinforcements arrived unexpectedly, forcing him into immediate defensive stance where knives were drawn again, preparing counterattack against overwhelming odds, now facing man alone in midst of enemy camp. Yet Thomas did not waver, even once, despite imminent danger posed by encroaching forces armed heavily with weapons intended specifically for crushing insurrections, such as current one unfolding here amidst cargo holds and machinery meant solely transporting goods rather than living beings forced into cruel bondage without hope or escape. Until now, Thomas led the children through darkened corridors, his heart pounding, but face set in grim determination. Each step was a risk, each breath held tightly against incoming threats that seemed to close in from all sides. Yet he remained steady, protecting those fragile lives with every ounce of strength and skill left within him. At last they reached main exit, where Thomas paused briefly to assess escape route quickly before making final push towards freedom. He glanced back once more at children clinging desperately alongside, ensuring none fell behind during rapid retreat, then turned swiftly towards awaiting danger ahead, ready to confront it head on, knowing victory was only possible if willing fight through impossible odds standing between them and safety. With renewed resolve burning fiercely within chest, Thomas Burke charged forward, leading small group of frightened but hopeful refugees away from horrors endured aboard ship, where humanity's darkest impulses had been on full display without restraint. He fought valiantly against hordes closing in relentlessly, yet remained unyielding, always pressing onward towards freedom, even when path grew increasingly treacherous and uncertain. Yet despite overwhelming odds stacked against him at every turn, Thomas refused to falter, driven instead by singular focus guiding his actions, now more than ever before saving lives of innocents who had been stripped of all hope. Until night, he opened door only to find maternal desperation burning brightly within eyes of pale blue woman named Kyra, pleading urgently for help. And so it was that amidst chaos and carnage unfolding aboard ship, Master Sergeant Thomas Burke emerged victorious once again, not through strength of arms alone, but sheer force of will, powering every action forward toward ultimate goal set forth earlier under moonlit sky when fate brought him unlikely connection with alien mother, determined to save her children despite impossible odds facing them all combined. And Thomas led the children through darkened corridors, his heart pounding but face set in grim determination. Each step was a risk, each breath held tightly against incoming threats that seemed to close in from all sides. Yet he remained steady, protecting those fragile lives with every ounce of strength and skill left within him. At last they reached main exit, where Thomas paused briefly to assess escape route quickly before making final push towards freedom. He glanced back once more at children clinging desperately alongside ensuring none fell behind during rapid retreat, then turned swiftly towards awaiting danger ahead, ready to confront it head on, knowing victory was only possible if willing fight through impossible odds standing between them and safety. The air in the corridor grew colder as Thomas and the three Velshawn children approached a large cargo container. He paused, his hand on the handle of an old knife he kept hidden beneath his jacket. The sound of distant shouting reached their ears, and Thomas's muscles tensed, ready for any attack at a moment's notice. "Stay behind me," he whispered to the oldest child, who nodded solemnly in response. They moved slowly towards the container, his eyes scanning every shadow as they neared it. With a final glance around him, Thomas pushed open the heavy door of the cargo hold and peered inside. There was no movement at first, only stillness filled with an oppressive quiet that seemed to pulse between them like a living thing. Then he saw small figures huddled in one corner, three tiny forms peeking out from behind a stack of crates, their blue skin blending into the shadows almost unnaturally well. Thomas knelt slowly by the container door, his heart clenching painfully as he met those wide eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. "It's okay," he murmured gently, showing them Kyra's data chip. The oldest child, barely 8 years old, but already burdened far beyond her age, reached out hesitantly toward it. The image of their mother flashed across the screen, a pale blue woman, silver hair matted with blood and violet eyes that burned with desperate determination despite visible injuries and obvious exhaustion from what could only be hours of crawling towards this very spot to find him. "Your mama sent me," Thomas said softly. His voice was steady, but broke at the mention of their mother's name. The youngest child, no more than 4 or 5 years old, began to cry quietly into his brother's shoulder, while the middle one clung tightly around the oldest's waist like a lifeline in dark waters. "It's okay," Thomas repeated, pulling out some dried fruit rations from his pack. "We're going to take you all back home." The eldest child reached for the data chip again and looked at it carefully before nodding firmly, as if understanding everything that had led them here, loss of innocence traded in exchange for hope. "Is Mama alive?" The voice was barely a whisper, but Thomas heard every word clearly. "I promise," he said quietly. "She's waiting for you." The children exchanged glances, and then looked back at him with cautious trust now visible within those frightened eyes. They had no reason to believe anyone until proven otherwise, yet something in his demeanor must have reassured them, because they nodded, accepting this unexpected protector who promised safety when none existed before. Thomas gathered the two youngest into a secure hold while speaking reassuringly, all along trying not to startle or frighten these tiny beings too much. With one arm still wrapped protectively around the middle child, and the other holding on to her oldest sibling's hand firmly, ensuring she wouldn't fall behind, Thomas rose from his crouch. "We have to go now," he said urgently, as they made their way out of the container area, heading straight towards ship's main entrance, where Thomas had seen a clear path leading back outside earlier. Every breath was tense with anticipation, and every movement careful, each step taken meticulously to avoid detection by slaver forces still patrolling this section. As they neared exit door, sudden noise interrupted otherwise silent trek. Burst of gunfire echoing loudly through corridors, indicating new wave of enemies closing in upon them from multiple directions, creating a deadly web ready to ensnare unwary intruders such as themselves. But Thomas did not hesitate, nor lose focus on task at hand, Rather, he quickened pace, while drawing knife out swiftly, preparing counterattack against overwhelming odds, now facing man alone amidst enemy camp. Yet despite danger posed by encroaching forces armed heavily with weapons intended specifically for crushing insurrections, like current one unfolding here amongst cargo holds and machinery meant solely transporting goods, instead living beings forced into cruel bondage without hope or escape, until Thomas had arrived that night, bringing unlikely connection with alien mother determined to save her children against impossible odds. With renewed resolve burning fiercely within chest, Thomas Burke charged forward, leading small group of frightened but hopeful refugees away from horrors endured aboard ship, where humanity's darkest impulses were on full display without restraint. He fought valiantly against hordes closing in relentlessly, yet remained unyielding, always pressing onward towards freedom, even when path grew increasingly treacherous and uncertain. Yet despite overwhelming odds stacked against him at every turn, Thomas refused to falter, driven instead by singular focus guiding his actions, now more than ever before saving lives of innocents who had been stripped of all hope. Until night, he opened door only to find maternal desperation burning brightly within eyes of pale blue woman named Kyra, pleading urgently for help. And so it was that amidst chaos and carnage unfolding aboard ship, Master Sergeant Thomas Burke emerged victorious once again, not through strength of arms alone, but sheer force of will, powering every action forward toward ultimate goal set forth earlier under moonlit sky, when fate brought him unlikely connection with alien mother determined to save her children despite impossible odds facing them all combined. Andy Thomas had just secured Kyra's children in a hidden compartment within his cabin, ensuring their safety before he left to face the inevitable confrontation aboard the slaver ship that had been tracking them since dawn. The night was cold and still as Thomas approached the ship, each step echoing ominously on the metal ramp leading up into the belly of the vessel. His breath formed tiny clouds in front of him, visible even under his mask. As he entered the cargo hold where Kyra's children were last known to be hidden, a sudden burst of noise erupted from above. Gunfire and shouts mingled with panicked screams. Thomas knew it was only a matter of time before their location would be discovered by Drex4 and his men. In those moments, Thomas felt an overwhelming surge of purpose that had been absent for years. These weren't just Kyra's children, he saw them as his own, the ones he lost in a car crash 10 years ago. Each step forward was another chance to redeem himself, to save what could not be saved before. The bridge of the slaver ship glowed with ominous red and blue lights flashing intermittently against the metallic walls. Drexler stood at his station, flanked by several armed guards who watched anxiously as he monitored a series of screens displaying various sections of the ship. Dex4 was an imposing figure even in death, tall and muscular, with sharp features that spoke volumes about his cruel nature. His eyes were cold and calculating as they scanned over reports from his subordinates. The latest alert had him growling beneath his breath, "Where are those traitors? They should have been caught by now." A soldier entered the bridge, rushing towards Drex4 with urgent news. "They are not in their last known location," the man reported hesitantly. "Reports show they may have fled to the lower levels of the ship." Drexler's eyes narrowed dangerously. He knew he had little time left before his end came, a condition that made him even more volatile and unpredictable. "Get your men down there now," Drex4 ordered, gesturing roughly towards one of his lieutenants, who nodded hastily and rushed off to comply with the order. Cargo hold. Thomas emerged from hiding spots amongst cargo containers, holding tightly onto Kyra's data chip. He knew that every second counted. He needed to reach the bridge without alerting Drex 4 or any other guards patrolling nearby areas of the ship. The path was treacherous, with narrow corridors and dimly lit passageways making it difficult for him to stay hidden. As Thomas made his way through a darkened hallway, he noticed several slavers moving towards an intersection up ahead where they would likely be trapped if they continued their current route. Without hesitation, Thomas ducked behind some crates and began formulating a plan of action. He knew that the key lay in taking out Drex 4 himself, no matter how many guards stood between him and his goal. That was what had always given Thomas an edge over other soldiers during his days as a military operative. He could think on his feet, adapt to changing circumstances with ease, all while maintaining focus. Bridge Drexfer stood confidently behind his desk, eyes flicking towards the door where guards were still searching for intruders. However, even as they worked diligently, there was an underlying sense of unease hanging heavy in the air. Something told him that their efforts would be futile against this new threat. Suddenly, footsteps echoed loudly from outside, causing all present to tense up instantly. Guards readied themselves at attention, while Drexper's eyes narrowed suspiciously as he looked towards his security monitors, hoping for a sign of who dared invade his sanctuary now. The door slid open with an ominous creak, and there stood Thomas Burke, holding nothing but a small knife in one hand, yet radiating an intensity that caused every single guard to freeze momentarily before drawing their weapons defensively. "What is the meaning of this?" Drexfer growled menacingly from behind his desk, eyes narrowing suspiciously as he scanned over each man beside him, then focusing intently on Thomas. "Who are you?" Thomas stepped forward calmly despite the guns pointed directly at him, every one of them fully capable of tearing through flesh and bone in an instant should they decide to take action. "I'm here for your captain," Thomas said simply, voice steady, even as he met Drexfer's gaze head on. His hand tightened around his knife ever so slightly, but there was no threat in his demeanor, or only resolve burning brightly within eyes dulled by years of loss yet never completely extinguished. "Why should I listen to you?" Drex 4 sneered, stepping forward himself now that had dismissed any immediate danger posed by Thomas. "You're just another one, man crusade looking for glory." Thomas shook his head slowly, but kept eye contact firm and unwavering as he answered, "Glory has nothing to do with this, Commander Drexfer. This is about ending your tyranny once and for all." Drex 4's eyes flicked up sharply at the title. No one had dared address him thusly in years save those who knew better than challenge his authority otherwise. "What makes you think I care what happens to me?" Drex 4 asked, voice dripping with venomous sarcasm as he leaned forward, slightly pressing hands against desktop edges, almost leaning into Thomas' face while speaking further. "I'm already dead man walking." Thomas didn't waver under Drex 4's glare, rather his expression hardened even more resolutely. "I don't give a damn about your so-called fate," Thomas retorted coldly. "What matters is those innocent lives you've taken or plan to take from here on." Drexfer laughed harshly, leaning back slightly with arms crossing over broad chest dismissively, almost as if he were mocking any pretense of justice being served by a single man such as Thomas Burke. "You think I care what happens to them?" Drex 4 sneered. "They are nothing more than cargo to me." But before the words could fully leave his lips, something in Thomas snapped entirely, all previous restraint breaking free at once, with blinding fury blazing through eyes now wild and uncontrolled. "Wrong," Thomas interrupted harshly, stepping forward even closer so that he towered menacingly over Drex 4, who began visibly shifting uncomfortably. under the sheer weight of Thomas' presence. These are children, innocent beings deserving better than your hands dragging them down. Dex-4's guards started to shift uneasily around them, uncertain about their captain's situation, but knowing they had no orders yet against this intruder. Before anyone could react further, though, Dex-4 lunged suddenly at Thomas with surprising speed given his condition. But even weakened as he was by impending fate, Dex-4's combat skills were still formidable enough to catch most opponents off guard. Swung heavily towards Thomas, but the veteran operative managed, deftly stepping inside range and delivering a sharp jab directly into Dex-4's solar plexus, causing him to double over sharply. Seizing upon momentary advantage, Thomas pressed forward, ruthlessly slamming knife tip against vulnerable part of neck, threateningly, yet holding just enough back from killing blow as he glared intensely down at his quaking opponent, now struggling desperately, but hopelessly, against iron grip tightening around throat, even further choking breath away, until only gasping sounds remained audible above ground. "You want to know why I'm here?" Thomas growled darkly into Dex-4's face, eyes blazing with righteous fury. "It's not just about ending you, it's about making sure your kind never threatens innocence again." And then, without another word or hesitation, twisted blade quickly slicing through neck, cleanly severing head from body completely before stepping back, watching silently as last remnants of cruel captain died, gasping painfully, onto ground below him. Cargo hold. The moment Dex-4's scream cut through the ship, Thomas knew it was time to move. Every second counted now. He needed to ensure that Kyra's children were safe and free before any others on board discovered their hiding place. With renewed purpose burning within his chest, once more Thomas charged forward towards bridge, knowing final battle lay ahead. Yet despite overwhelming odds stacked against him at every turn, Thomas refused to falter, driven instead by singular focus guiding actions, now more than ever saving lives of innocents who had been stripped hope until night. He opened door only find maternal desperation burning brightly within eyes. Alien mother determined save her children against impossible odds facing them all combined. Thomas' victory was not through strength alone, but sheer force of will propelling every action forward towards ultimate goal set earlier under moonlit sky. When fate brought unlikely connection with Kyra, her determination fueling Thomas' resolve to redeem himself, ensuring that no child would suffer the horrors endured aboard this vessel ever again. Thomas carried the youngest child, a small creature no more than 3 years old, in his arms as he moved through the forest towards his cabin. The older two children held tightly to either side of him, their hands small and clammy but determined. Their mother's desperate plea had driven them onward, each step fueled by a sense of purpose and urgency. The journey back seemed both too long and yet impossibly short under Thomas' relentless pace. His heart pounded in his chest, every muscle burning with exertion as he fought through the dense woods. The youngest child nestled against him, whimpered softly, but neither Thomas nor the children dared to pause or rest. Finally, they reached the edge of the clearing that bordered his cabin. As sunlight filtered through the trees and bathed the small structure in its golden glow, Thomas halted momentarily. His breath was heavy, muscles protesting from overexertion, but he pushed past fatigue with grim determination etched onto every line of his face. "Hold tight," he said gruffly to the children as they approached the cabin door. He reached out and turned the knob swiftly before stepping inside, his grip never wavering on his burden, nor failing to ensure that the older two remained close behind him. The room was dim but welcoming compared to the harsh elements outside. Setting the youngest child down gently onto a nearby chair by the fireplace, Thomas' eyes scanned quickly for medical supplies. He kept stock despite years of solitude. He knelt beside Kyra first, laying her out on another makeshift cot near where she had been resting previously. Her breaths were shallow and ragged, blood now crusted across her matted silver hair, a stark contrast to the pale hue that was rapidly fading away. "Stay with me," Thomas said, his voice low but firm as he began assessing Kyra's injuries once more, despite knowing it was likely too late for significant medical intervention. The children hovered at a respectful distance, their eyes wide and fearful yet filled with unwavering hope. He had seen enough of the world to know when someone meant business. "Uncle Tom," the older girl whispered softly as she stepped closer towards Kyra's side, though she was barely more than 10 years old herself. Her voice broke slightly, but Thomas could hear her resolve clear through it, the same unyielding spirit that had brought them so far and kept them going against all odds. Thomas nodded solemnly in acknowledgement before turning back to focus on treating Kyra's wounds as best he could. The data chip still clutched weakly within her trembling grasp glowed faintly with its stored information. Thomas knew the coordinates were precious, guiding his next actions clearly now that he was here and safe. "Where are they?" he asked urgently, but softly, for wanting to cause further distress in these final moments. Kyra's eyes flickered open once more after a long pause, her gaze focusing on him as if seeing through layers of despair. A slow smile played across her lips despite the agony etched deeply into every line and curve. She managed to whisper back just enough for Thomas to hear. "Inside the cargo hold." The data chip was already in his hand by then. He knew exactly where their next stop needed to be. "Cargo hold." Thomas left Kyra with a gentle kiss on her forehead, promising silently that this would not end as it began. He carried the children's makeshift containers back through the darkened corridors of Drexler's ship, each step echoing ominously against his resolve. Reaching the cargo hold was like stepping into another world, cold metal and dim red lights starkly contrasting with the warmth he had left behind at his cabin. The data chip guided him directly to their hiding spot, a large cylindrical container marked cargo, but concealing far more than its labels indicated. With a steady hand, Thomas undid the lock mechanism swiftly before lifting open the lid. Inside were 3 small figures huddled together under blankets and makeshift barriers they had created from old clothing. "Mom," the middle child spoke up first in disbelief as their eyes met, though fear had not yet faded entirely away. The youngest one cried out softly upon seeing him, recognizing Thomas now with a mixture of relief washing over her tiny frame. But it was the eldest who stepped forward tentatively toward Kyra's hand, still hanging near them, an offering or assurance perhaps that this was indeed their way home at last. Kyra reached back weakly and took hold gently yet firmly as Thomas approached further, lifting each child into his arms one by one until all 3 were safe in his grasp once more. His heart swelled painfully, but also with hope renewed. Each step towards reuniting them brought warmth to places he thought long dead inside. "We're going home," he said quietly but powerfully, enough for everyone to hear clearly over the echoes of footsteps now fading into empty void behind him where Drex's force ship lay abandoned and darkened. Back at cabin carrying Kyra's children with care, Thomas made his way back across familiar terrain under moonlight that seemed almost to guide their journey, now completed in spirit, if not yet fully fleshed out before them, all arriving together safely once more within the comforting confines of home. Kyra was barely alive, but conscious when they arrived, her breath shallow and labored, each one a testament against impossible odds she had faced. Yet here she lay finally, at rest upon Thomas' makeshift medical supply surrounded now by those whom fate seemed determined to protect through sheer force of will burning bright within their eyes. The children rushed toward Kyra immediately, without hesitation, her presence alone bringing tears streaming down their faces, but also a joyous relief none could fully express in words, yet still communicated clearly through actions and silences shared deeply among them all. Kyra reached out feebly with one trembling hand towards Thomas first, though her eyes locked onto his own as she whispered softly, "I thank you." Thomas stood there silently for a moment, the weight of her gratitude hitting him profoundly despite no spoken words needing to bridge that gap fully between two souls connected by shared purpose now fulfilled. "You're welcome," he finally managed in response before turning back gently towards the children rushing forward with their mother once more within reach and safe arms surrounding them all tightly together at last. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity, as Thomas did everything possible to stabilize Kyra's condition despite knowing time was running thin. His medical skills, rusty but honed by years of training and experience in field conditions, worked the overtime now amidst palpable tension hanging heavily over the small space where hope had become their only companion. But gradually, even this too faded into quieter moments. Kyra's breathing steadied somewhat under careful monitoring, her injuries stabilized, if not yet fully healed. The children grew visibly calmer as Wealthy began to settle down around their mother's side, sharing stories of adventures on the ship and fears faced together now behind them all finally in reach. Thomas watched quietly from a distance, his eyes occasionally flickering over each one with an unspoken understanding that resonated deeply within him. He had not felt such purpose or redemption since his own family died. These moments were fleeting yet profound, serving as bittersweet reminders of what loss truly meant, juxtaposed against hope's enduring flame burning brightly here now. Kyra turned to look at Thomas again after a while, her voice softer but stronger than before when she spoke next. "You have saved them us, but my time grows short." Thomas stepped closer then, placing one hand gently on Hershey's, eyes meeting Kyra's own with open honesty and mutual respect building between two lives forever intertwined now through shared journey. "Hold on," he said quietly but firmly. "We'll figure something out." Kyra smiled faintly in acknowledgement, though it seemed more like a promise than reassurance from her lips. She reached up slowly to place one hand against Thomas' cheek briefly before turning back towards her children cradled close beside her, forming an unbreakable bond that spoke volumes beyond words, shared yet remained profoundly meaningful still. As days passed, Kyra's condition stabilized further under continuous care and nurturing environment provided by both Thomas and the children themselves, who had grown increasingly confident in their surroundings. Her recovery was slow but steady. Each day brought new milestones achieved against impossible odds faced thus far together as one united front now firmly established within cabin walls sheltering them all. 1 week later, Kyra sat on the porch with Thomas, both leaning against wooden railings overlooking Forest Bay, in silence between them thick yet filled entirely by presence shared without need for spoken words. He had built bunk beds, and spare room nights were spent around fires sharing stories and laughter from days gone past alongside those still to come. Children called him Uncle Tom within first week itself, a nickname born naturally through bonds formed strongly amidst adversities faced together thus far. Indeed, Kyra looked up at Thomas one evening during such gathering, her eyes filled with gratitude mixed with deep affection now evident even amidst physical frailty remaining still very much present. Yet she continued to smile warmly towards him. "You have given us home," she said softly but clearly, enough for everyone gathered around fire pit listening intently as well. We owe you more than just thank. Thomas shook his head gently in response, a small yet sincere smile playing across lips. You don't owe me anything. You are my family now. Kyra nodded back solemnly, her gaze reflecting understanding deep within those violet eyes. She turned briefly towards children sitting nearby who waved happily up at her before returning focus fully onto Thomas once more. We will build future together, she said firmly yet lovingly, as if confirming both promise and reality already unfolding between them all collectively. You, me, and our children, a new chapter written amidst ashes of old ones burned away entirely through shared struggles faced head on without hesitation or fear, only resolve burning brightly within hearts brought together under moonlit skies where fate had once again woven threads tightly, intertwining lives that would never part ways evermore. And Kyra's recovery was slow but steady, each day marked with incremental progress towards reclaiming strength long lost amidst horrors faced. Her children thrived in newfound safety and stability Thomas provided, growing closer to both him as well as Kyra herself, who continued slowly healing physically, even while emotional wounds too began mending bit by bit through shared journey of mutual support. Neither spoke much often, but conversation flowed naturally between them, all no filled entirely with unspoken understanding that no words alone could ever fully express, yet remained profoundly meaningful nonetheless within hearts tightly bound together amidst adversities faced thus far. Indeed, two broken souls, healing slowly and steadily alongside one another, now forming single unit stronger than sum of parts combined truly. And so Thomas' cabin became a sanctuary for not just Kyra, but also her three children, offering safe haven where hope continued burning brightly despite impossible odds, once faced head on without hesitation or fear evermore.